I really love it here. I want to stay here forever and ever and ever. What can I say about The Shining that hasn't been said 1,000 times before? There's so many videos out there that go into real in-depth and analytical approach to the film that are amazing. The thing I can offer with it is just offering the first experience I had watching it, why it's one of my favourite films of all time, as it is for so many cinema goers out there, and just why it's been such a staple in the horror genre for so long. I very clearly remember the first time watching The Shining. It was on TV. I think it might have been on a Sky Movies channel or something like that at the time. And I was actually dog sitting for my nan who was away at the time, and me and my mum went to stay there. And I think the reason it left such an impression on me, of course, The Shining is set at the Overlook Hotel, this huge isolated venue, and my nan's house at the time was this big house, and I just loved every minute of it. I thought it was really tense. You're never quite sure what's going to happen, particularly because I hadn't read the book at the time either, and so I had literally no idea what was going to happen. I loved that about it. I loved how unpredictable it was, and I loved the acting, and it was just incredible. And it was also the first Stanley Kubrick film I watched, and that introduced me to his long line of brilliant films. It's the 40th anniversary of The Shining this year, so I thought it was a particularly good one to be able to do this around Halloween this year in particular, 40 years since it was released in cinemas. I just rewatched it on Blu-ray, watched the extended version which I hadn't seen before, and there's a lot of cool little details thrown in there, and I'd recommend that for anyone who's interested in the original theatrical cut. For anyone who doesn't know and hasn't seen The Shining, firstly I'd recommend you go and watch that straight away, like literally stop this video and go and watch it because it's an amazing film. But for those of you who haven't watched it and just want to know a bit more about it, The Shining is set at the Overlook Hotel, which is this isolated hotel. We meet the Torrance family at the very beginning. That's made of Jack, the father and husband, played by Jack Nicholson, Wendy, the wife and mother, played by Shelley Duvall, and Danny, their son, played by Danny Lloyd. Uphold the maintenance of the building over the winter months as the hotel's not being used. They become the caretakers. Made quite ambiguous as to whether this place is actually haunted or if it's just having a real psychological toll, in particular on Jack, over the months that they spend in isolation there. But it's very safe to say this is a haunted hotel, and it's just realised perfectly. The theme music by Wendy Carlos and Rachel Elkind is really hypnotic. It's genuinely spooky music. The theme music is just brilliant, and hypnotic is the word for it. It does keep you entranced in its spell throughout the running time. It helps to do that, and I think that's also what Dr. Sleep recently, Mike Flanagan's film version of Stephen King's sequel to The Shining, does really well. The sound effects and the music in that film are superb as well. Incredible editing by Rob Lovejoy, and I've always seen The Shining as a perfect example of editing. I do think the jump scares in it aren't your traditional jump scares. There's nothing that really, bar one towards the end probably, that is a genuine jump scare. The rest of it is very much just in suggestion, or when a shot pans to another shot, and the best example of this unconventional jump is when Danny's in bed and it just pans to him from another shot with this real terrified look in his face, and that still gives me the creeps to this day. And I remember the first time watching it being really bothered by that jump. It was really It was just really cleverly done, scarily done. A notorious battle between Stanley Kubrick, the filmmaker, and Stephen King, the author. King notoriously didn't like this film, and actually so much to the point that he made his own film version of The Shining, made in terms of a mini-series which stayed closer to the book. It definitely is Kubrick's film. He did make it his own, and of course it's based on the original source material, and it does stress that. It does make sure you know it's a King original, but it does definitely go its own ways. In some ways, in comparison to the book, it's probably a bit more ambiguous in its supernatural possibilities. When you're watching it, you're not quite sure. It's more suggesting that this is a haunted hotel, and you can kind of interpret whether it is or whether it's just Jack in particular going insane. But then there's the argument said, well, Danny has the Shining, which enables him to reach the other side and have these telepathic communications with spirits. So that does kind of trump that idea, but you can see it either way. Right at the very start, you can see how at odds Jack is with Wendy and Danny. Even in the car journey going up to the hotel with his family, you can see he's just not quite on the same wavelength as them. There's almost this slight resentment consistently going on in the film. No matter how much he says, how much he loves his son, you can see there's some sort of disdain in it.
What was the donut party?
They were a party of settlers in covered wagon times. They got snowbound one winter in the mountains. They had to resort to cannibalism in order to stay alive.
You mean they ate each other up?
They had to, in order to survive.
Jack, don't worry, Mom. I know all about cannibalism. I saw it on TV.
See? It's okay. We saw it on the television.
Danny Lloyd's performance in this is just one of the best child performances ever. He really does absolutely embody Danny the character. He is a source of what I found so scary about the film, is just his reactions to certain things, like red rum, oh, it still gives you the shivers. Scatman Crothers also deserves a really great mention as the cook in the film, who plays a very important part, particularly in Danny's growth and his understanding of what The Shining is. He plays a massive part in that, and Scatman Crothers, not only is that a fantastic name, but there's also a behind the scenes interview with Scatman talking about Stanley Kubrick and the film production, and he genuinely gets choked up and teared up thinking about it out in terms of how joyful the experience was and how much he loved the people he was working with. And it's a really touching interview. I definitely recommend going to watch that. Jack Nicholson is of course one of the best actors of all time, and in this he really does encapsulate the role of the madman perfectly, I think. For example, there's this shot of him craning his neck up from a certain victim that he has that is just incredible. It's just really well done. The look on his face, in particular in the first half of the film when he's staring out the window, seemingly kind of looking at Wendy and Danny from afar, and you can just see he's just not with it, man. he's genuinely insane. There's also this part when he's just really angry coming down the corridor towards the ballroom, and it's a brilliant scene that is just intense, and he plays this guy who's just so psychologically tormented that you just wonder what's going on in his head. In the behind the scenes they did say most of the mad moments were on the 28th take or such. Stanley Kubrick was notorious for doing many takes for each shot. They did say it was around about the 28th take that Jack Nicholson would almost genuinely go insane and just get really embodied in the character and just he provided something different on each take, which again just proves why he's such a great actor. The character of Jack does definitely have a death wish from the beginning. I think there's just this feeling, the more you look at him, that he's kind of from the very beginning, he's almost kind of given up on life a little bit, and he's just had it with society and family issues and such. The Steadicam used by Garrett Brown is just brilliant. The tracking shots are so frenetic and just absolutely beautifully done, and it does add to the frantic pace of the film, in particular in its times of action and full-on horror. You can feel how high energy it is. Quite an underrated film in terms of how funny it is as well, and I always found this from the start. I think Jack's interaction with Mr. Grady, for example, in the ballroom is just comedy genius.
You a married man, are you, Mr. Grady?
You were the caretaker here.
You chopped your wife and kids up into little pieces.
Oh, I love that scene, it's so good. If you haven't seen it yet and you're into your horror, it's an absolute must-see. I think it's a masterpiece. Ready Player One, Steven Spielberg's film adaptation of the book.
I loved Ready Player One, and part of the reason was for that was its pop culture references,
And there's a whole sequence dedicated to this film, which I remember seeing in the cinema, seeing Ready Player One, and just thinking, this is just film magic. I love this.
I also went to the Kubrick
Exhibition about a year or so ago, and I'd really recommend going to that exhibition. It had really cool props
from all of Kubrick's films, but in particular The Shining was great, and script extracts
and all of those just there, and I'd really recommend that. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video.